presentation is divided into 4 parts. Some background on today's presentation, and then some historical and theoretical perspectives on the movement from a unicultural or monocultural state to a multicultural state. The current situation and bargaining position of the 5 main excluded groups and the dominant group. And then certain dilemmas of multiculturalism and possible steps to deal with them in the Nepali context. The promise of ethnic federalism and a territory of their own offers no relief for women or Dalits because they are distributed across the country, as I said earlier. And because the origin of their exclusion is deeply embedded in the values and world views of the Nepali society that are widely shared among the whole population. These 2 groups have the most to gain from a strong common framework that guarantees substantive equality to all citizens. Along with other religious minorities, the small, endangered ethnic groups, Dalits, Muslims, and women, could become the champions for a constitutional approach to inclusion that relies more on the establishment and enforcing of rules of the game for equitable coexistence and self-determination within the Nepali state, rather than one that focuses on separation or new hierarchies that would once again leave them at the bottom. Members of these groups may be far more credible as mediators in a broad debate than the current male Baun Chetri political leaders who might be suspected of trying to block ethnic federalism as a means of retaining their former hegemony. The main thing I'm suggesting is that we may need to rethink space. What do we mean by space for self-determination? Nepal is not the Amazon, with a few completely discrete groups scattered in a big jungle. We need to recognize that Nepal's history and economic development has led to extensive spatial intermixing of its diverse groups over millennia. Solutions based on linking group rights and identity recognition to specific territories are likely to be messy and conflictual. We may have to go that way, but it does seem like a very dangerous route. I'm suggesting that we could use the Constitution to create institutional space rather than physical space as a means of guaranteeing self-determination and recognition of diverse identity groups. And here, my final slide, I go back to the relationship between the state institutions and different groups in a multicultural state. I would like to emphasize that here, the constitution-making process has the power to forge an institutional space within which Nepal's diverse identity groups can be ensured of the power of self-determination, or more simply, of greater influence over the institutions which shape their lives and reflect their values. This is what decentralization was supposed to do, but failed to do because the political elite did not want to let go of their centralized power over jobs and patronage. And I think that this is, I think Bihari was saying something the same yesterday, and I think that was a crucial failure of the 90s. The question before us now is whether today's political elite will repeat the mistake of 15 years ago, or whether they will realize the critical need to allow political leaders from excluded groups to share power in the center and make this newly diverse center more accountable to local communities. I mean, that seems to me the core of what Nepal needs to think about. In a way, the Madheshi and Janjati drive towards territory-based solutions to self-determination reflects their lack of trust in the state to really implement institution-based solutions, and the fear that without something tangible, like physical space, as a basis for self-determination, they will once again be outmaneuvered by those who control both the formal and the informal institutions of Nepal.
अर्को सत्रमा सहप्राध्यापक सुसन हानगेनले आदिवासी जनजातिका दृष्टिकोणबाट नेपालमा संहिताको बहसको प्रतीकपक्षीय पाटोको विषयमा कार्यपत्र पेश गर्नुभएको थियो.
The title of my paper, The Symbolic Dimensions of Nepal's Federalism Debate, is really, I must be upfront, from the perspective of the indigenous nationalities movement. That's probably the side of the debate you're going to hear more about here today. So we all know that the role of ethnicity in restructuring the state in Nepal has been widely discussed while the country works towards preparing its new constitution. And in this paper, I'm going to talk about why the indigenous nationalities movement has long called for federalism and investigate the symbolic dimensions of this debate on ethnicity, federalism, and the state from the indigenous nationalities movement perspective. The concept of federalism, I'll show, is closely connected to the key goals of the indigenous nationalities movement, revitalizing indigenous cultures and identities and gaining access to political power. The concept of restructuring Nepal as a federal state has gained increasing support in Nepal since the 1990s. It was after 1990 the indigenous nationalities movement really introduced this concept to public debate. I was conducting research in Elam and other parts of eastern Nepal in the mid-1990s, and I found that most indigenous nationalities activists from a variety of political parties and organizations supported this idea way back then in the mid-90s. In conclusion, I want to say that the plan to adopt a federal structure in Nepal is, as I see it, non-retractable at this point. Since 2006, the state has adopted a number of symbolic measures that have signaled its willingness to become more inclusive, right? Declaring Nepal a secular state, we've got a new national anthem, so on and so forth. But so far, little has changed in the fundamental institutionalization of ethnic inequality. And I think there are many people who do not support federalism. What they need to do is to devise an alternative mechanism to create a more inclusive state and to ensure that ethnic inequality ends. This plan might have been possible. Something else might have been proposed that could have been persuasive to indigenous nationalities and other marginalized communities if it had happened 3-4 years ago. I think time has run out, though. I think it's pretty much impossible to create popular support among marginalized communities for a plan other than federalism, especially given the 35 days that remain until the Constitution must be written. Deadline, even if there's an extension, I think it's probably too late. The politically sound path, then, to avoid further alienating marginalized groups is to focus on developing a form of federalism that is flexible and fair.
प्राध्यापक गणेशमान गुरुङले मोडरेट गर्नुभएको सत्रमा उपप्राध्यापक मुक्तासिंह तामाङले पहिचान र सामर्थ्य भावी नेपालको लागि संवैधानिक खोजी विषयमा कार्यपत्र पेश गर्दै राज्य पुनर्संरचनाको मुख्य आधारको रूपमा चर्चा भएको पहिचान र सामर्थ्यको अवधारणाले नेपालको आकांक्षालाई कसरी प्रभावकारी ढंगले समेट्छ भन्ने तर्क गर्नुभएको थियो।
I was slightly shortened my title of my presentation and said identity and capability, constitutional question of future Nepal. What I try to do here is through reading some of the concept papers and draft reports presented by thematic committees of this Constituent Assembly, I try to explore emerging themes in terms of what kind of future that Nepal is imagining. After that, I will try to engage with some of the concepts on identity, cultural diversity, and federalism, and see what we can learn from the social and political. And then I have got some material how the committee works to see kind of the future. As you know, the phrase identity and capability, I have taken it from the report of State Restructuring Committee, which has taken these two concepts as basis for state restructuring. What I'm alluding here is also that these two concepts also reflects not only the basis of state restructuring, but also hope or the aspiration of Nepal that it wants to be. अब मैले के गर्ने भन्दा छिटो यो राज्य पुनर्संरचना र राज्य शक्तिको बाँडफाँड समितिले चाहिँ कसरी काम गरेछ भने हेरे। अब लास्टमा चाहिँ म के भन्नु भने अब यो एक किसिमको चाहिँ एकदम गाह्रो अहिले बजारमा चाहिँ हामीहरू इन्टरिम कन्स्टिट्युसनको अवस्थाबाट पनि वी आर मुभिङ ब्याकवर्ड भन्ने चाहिँ कुरा आइरहेको बेलामा यो पोजिटिभ नोटमा एन्ड गर्नु अलिकति आइरोनिक त देखेला तर मलाई के लाग्यो यो जुन पोलिटिकल जुन थिङ्किङ सोसियल साइन्स थ्योरीले के भनिरहेछ विश्वमा के भइरहेछ हामीले के गरिरहेछौँ त्यो सबै हेर्दाखेरि आई बिलिभ द्याट देयर इज अ प्लेस टु बी अप्टिमिस्टिक र आई वुड लाइक टु एन्ड बाई द लास्ट लाइन अफ आवर न्यू एन्थेम उसले के भन्छ भने अग्रगामी राष्ट्र हाम्रो जय जय नेपाल।
समानान्तर रूपमा भएको अर्को कार्यशालामा उपप्राध्यापक सारा सेन्डरम्यानले राज्यको पुनर्संरचना जातीयताको विषयमा कार्यपत्र पेश गर्नुभएको थियो।
In this paper I want to look at the processes of state and ethnicity formation in tandem with each other as part of a larger dialectical process. In the current debates in Nepal, we often talk about the project of state restructuring as if the state itself is the only thing in flux, the transformations of which can accommodate interests like ethnicity, which is portrayed as a static existential reality or a fixed asset, to put it more provocatively. We all know, of course, that ethnicity is constructed, but our tendency is to locate the temporal frame of that construction in the past, to the time of the Shah state, the Panchayat state, etc., not necessarily as an ongoing process in the present moment. I suggest that we need to add the restructuring post-conflict state to that list of key historical moments, and that in fact we're currently in a key classificatory moment, which has important implications not only for the future of the state, but for the future state of ethnicity in all of its dimensions. One critic of the Komarov's work, Hilton White, has suggested that, quote, hard work still lies ahead to discern in a rigorous way exactly where the developments described in Ethnicity, Inc. cross the line from continuity to epochal difference. So is the commodification of ethnicity truly a neoliberal phenomena? Is this kind of branding something that's new and really distinct? Or is it simply a variation on the timeless theme of objectifying consciousness and ethnic practice in ways that are recognizable to others? Even if it is the first, if it is a new phenomenon, we must ask what the limits of it are. The Komarovs write about the neoliberal era as if it's still unfolding or projected endlessly into the future, but other critics have already suggested that in fact it's over and we're on to something new already and we need to look at different sorts of dynamic. So the question is whether they're describing specific dynamics in specific places at specific times or ongoing processes which will continue to affect ethnic consciousness and its results in the future. Specifically in the Nepal context, is something new really happening? Are ethnic subjects being duped by forces of neoliberalism, whether you see that as filtered through the state or through development actors or through the market or all of them? Are they being duped into commodifying identity as property through claims to ethnic territory, allowing themselves to be branded, and following the red herring of cultural difference instead of grasping the real economic vectors of inequality? Of course, that sounds like a classic Marxist or Marxian argument, which is not that surprising coming from the Komarovs, because that's kind of their position. Or are age-old desires, what we might call the substantive content of ethnic consciousness, finally finding modes of expression within the new political contexts here that allow them not only to engage with the state, but to consider transforming it, not only by resisting it in the ways that Scott has suggested, but by locating themselves as an inalienable part of that state by claiming certain territories as ethnic property.
डाक्टर रेणुराज भण्डारले मोडरेट गर्नुभएको सत्रमा प्राध्यापक रामबहादुर छेत्रीले डेलिबरेसन अन द डिटर्मिनेसन अफ फेडरलाइजेसन इन नेपाल विथ रेफरेन्स टु एथनिक आइडेन्टिटी एन्ड एक्सेस टु रिसोर्सेस विषयमा कार्यपत्र प्रस्तुत गर्नुभएको थियो।
The theme that I have chosen is to talk about the issue of identity and resources as determinants of federalization, and then finally, talk a little bit about the proposed 14 provinces, and then how do I look at it, and then relate that to the issue of resources, access to resources, natural resources, and so on. गाउँलेहरूलाई चाहिँ खेतीपातीबाट अन्न उत्पादन गर्ने, थ्राइभ गर्ने, अनि त्यसबाट चाहिँ फेरि अलिकति सकियो भने चाहिँ नाफा पनि गर्ने जुन कुरा हुन सक्छ, त्यो चाहिँ अब कसरी सम्भव हुन्छ यहाँ, त्यो चाहिँ प्रश्नको रूपमा खडा हुन्छ। सिरियल क्रप प्रोडक्सन अब जमिनको अवस्था त्यस्तो भएपछि झन्डै त्यही प्याटर्न चाहिँ रिपिट गर्छ। वन क्षेत्र जसलाई चाहिँ एकदमै महत्त्व दिइरहेका हुन्छन् गाउँघरमा, कम्युनिटी फरेस्ट्री जसरी फैलिएको छ यो देशमा, त्यसले पनि त्यो कुरा चाहिँ स्पष्ट हामीलाई भन्छ।